The James Bond movie franchise has long had an esoteric and confusing canon, but an abandoned Timothy Dalton sequel could have settled the debate. Almost every James Bond movie has questions surrounding it regarding where it belongs within the franchise's canon, if it even belongs anywhere at all. James Bond's changing face is the biggest factor that contributes to the uncertainty surrounding the timeline, and while there may never be a satisfying explanation given, Dalton's spell as Bond came very close to clearing up the tangled web of vague continuity. That being said, another Bond era also teased an answer. Every Bond movie that's actually based on Ian Fleming's stories has come together with the looser interpretations of the author's work to create an impressive collection of feature-length films. Like with any long-running franchise, James Bond has had to start getting coy with its canon so the story can continue. Every James Bond actor has brought something new to the role while remaining respectful of the character's legacy. 007's numerous recastings have never received an in-universe explanation, but it has come very close to clearing other things up. Timothy Dalton's unmade third Bond movie would have answered 007's canon question. An unused Dalton script referenced Bond events from before his era. A 2020 book by author Mark Edits called The Lost Adventures of James Bond mentions several planned projects that were never put into production. The book references unmade Timothy Dalton Bond movies. The script for a potential third Dalton movie was penned by William Osborne, who ended up contributing to Pierce Brosnan's 1995 Bond film, GoldenEye, which was the next installment after Dalton's departure. Excerpts from Osborne's unused script are featured in Edits' book, and the dialogue from Dalton's Bond would have directly tied his version of the character to previous iterations. Timothy Dalton's Bond left after 2 movies, but he was slated to speak with a love interest in a third film, delivering revealing statements such as, "Did I ever tell you about the time Blofeld dumped me in a pool of sharks?" and "Goldfinger makes me look like a complete idiot." The dialogue is a direct reference to 1965's Thunderball and the preceding movie, Goldfinger from 1964. What's interesting about this abandoned exchange is that Sean Connery was still in the lead role for both movies being referenced by Dalton's Bond. In fact, Dalton didn't play the franchise's title character until 1987's The Living Daylights. If the abandoned third movie had been made, then the dialogue from Dalton's Bond would have been the most direct reference to stories from the character's past. If so, it would have been difficult to argue that all the Bond movies until that point had indeed been part of the same canon. In its absence, the ambiguity remains firmly in place. Roger Moore's era came closest to solving James Bond canon. Tracy was the late love interest of George Lazenby's Bond. Roger Moore placing flowers on Tracy's grave as James Bond in For Your Eyes Only. Although the movie mentioned in Mark Edits' book never happened, that doesn't mean the franchise is completely without instances of James Bond actors referencing the events of their predecessors. In Roger Moore's For Your Eyes Only in 1981, Bond visits the grave of one Teresa Bond. Teresa, who went by Tracy, married Bond during the final moments of George Lazenby's lone movie in the role during 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. In Lazenby's movie, Tracy is killed by Blofeld, so Moore's Bond visiting her grave is a clever reference to a movie that came over a decade earlier.